Going to be examining some things from Ezekiel chapters 30 and 31. Now, here we once again have messages that are given to the people of Egypt, and specifically to Pharaoh in Egypt. And these are going to come in the midst of the captivity from Ezekiel. And I want us to notice a few things out of here. Now, many of the things that we're going to notice today are more historical in nature than they are necessarily present day applications for us. And sometimes those are the biggest lessons that we can learn are the historical elements of things that are going on at that particular time. And they're vital for us to understand events, but also for us to learn from the things that transpired. Obviously, you have Egypt, who is not a nation that follows God or that believes in God. As a matter of fact, toward the end of chapter 30, you're going to have statements of God concerning the fact that he has caused Pharaoh to have various ailments. You're going to have statements in chapter 31 concerning the idols of Egypt, and so on and so forth. And so Egypt is not a God-fearing nation from the standpoint of the God of Israel. And yet at the same time, doesn't mean that God does not have any involvement or is not concerned with the people of that nation. He says in verse 3 that the day is near, even the day of the Lord is near. It will be a day of clouds, the time of the Gentiles. The time is coming. Now, this is going to be a confrontation between Egypt and Babylon. And Egypt and Babylon had long been on opposite sides of the conflict equation. They have been fighting for years at this point at various times and places. And so Egypt and Babylon are not the best of friends, and they never have been, or at least not in recent times leading up to the writing of Ezekiel. But you'll notice in verse number 5 that Egypt is not alone as she will stand against Babylon. She has her allies with her. It's listed there in verse 5 that Ethiopia, Libya, Lydia, and the mingled people, Chub, and the men of the lands who are allied, they shall also fall by the sword. Egypt has a number of allies. What we would call today the Northern African nations are ones that are allied with the Egyptians. Egypt is not on her own in facing Babylon. But the fact of the matter is, it's not going to matter. Egypt is still going to lose. Egypt is still going to lose decisively. As a matter of fact, he says in verse 10, I will also make a multitude of Egypt to cease by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He and his people with him, the most terrible of the nations, shall be brought to destroy the land. They shall draw their swords against Egypt and fill the land with the slain. God says Nebuchadnezzar is going to come through, and he is going to be a sweeping scythe through the people of Egypt. And it is going to be a very bloody and a very violent affair. He also says that the Egyptians are going to be scattered among the nations, much the same as Israel and Judah are in those regards. And he says at the end of chapter 30, that he will disperse them throughout the countries, and then they shall know that I am the Lord. And so Egypt is going to be very much under the thumb of Babylon by the time it is all said and done. And then you come into chapter 31, and God is going to give another comparison for Egypt. As you come into chapter 31, Egypt is going to there be compared to Assyria. Now again, you have to have a little bit of a historical context in order to be able to understand what the comparison is. Because Assyria was the former nation that had great prominence and prestige, but Assyria was destroyed by Babylon and her allies some 20 years or 30 years now before this particular time in the writing of the book of Ezekiel. And so you actually have a historical precedent for a nation being brought under the heel, and for the city of Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, being destroyed, and so on and so forth. Those things all happened around 612 to 614 BC. And so these things are going to take place some 30 years later. But God is going to utilize in chapter 31 a comparison between the fall of Assyria and what will happen with the fall of Egypt. And so you're going to have all of these things that are going to take place. And you're going to have God laying out for the Egyptian people, and specifically for Pharaoh, what it is that's going to happen and how it's going to happen, so that they might know that he is the Lord God. It is not because they have never heard of him before. It is because they refuse to acknowledge him, much like his own people. Remember, this has been the common theme throughout the book of Ezekiel. God is doing all of this, and he is allowing all of this to happen so that people will know that he is the Lord. And even the Babylonians are going to come to this realization and understanding, as we read in Daniel concerning Nebuchadnezzar's come to acknowledge that God truly is the one true God of heaven. These are the things that we find in Ezekiel chapters 30 and 31, and we could dig into little nuggets and tidbits here and there, but these are the key components of these two chapters. Next time, we will come back and we will examine Ezekiel chapter 32 as God continues his messages to Egypt. But until then, have a great day.